questions after we go through the basics. Shall we do it like that?
Yeah, that would be great. Should we do a quick hello first, or did anybody?
Of course.
Maybe we'll do a quick hello. And Betsy and Kirsten might just say something about, plans for Scotland and colleagues who aren't with us in Scotland, and I'll say something about Cardiff and Manchester. But Peter, if you want to go first and just do a quick intro, that would be brilliant.
Sure. Okay, I'm Dr. Peter Doran. I'm based at the School of Law at Queen's University in Belfast. I'm there mostly because I have a long, well, it feels like a lifetime background in really environmental activism and policy. I've worked in the parliaments in Belfast and Dublin. I've also been a senior editor and writer at UN negotiations for the International Institute for Sustainable Development. So I've written up and analysed negotiations going right back to 1993-94. My first big multilateral process was actually the Beijing process, the women's platform, which was it was one of my big learning points in terms of how the multilateral process works. And I've been using the world climate game or simulation in my teaching, both at Queen's University and at summer schools in South Korea, going back some years as well. So I find it a very interesting way of introducing learning through head, heart, and hand, really hands-on learning for young people who respond so well to the fact that we learn through the emotions and through doing rather than through exclusively conceptual approaches. Okay, thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you, Peter. That's excellent. And as we've known for a while, we're in good hands with your experience in this climate simulation. So yeah, it's great to have your support for these other events. Yeah, Betsy and Kirsten, do you want to go next, and then I'll say something after you, if that's okay?
Yeah, hello. Nice to meet you, Peter. I'm Betsy King. I work for Scotland's UN Regional Centre of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development, which is one of an international network of RCEs. We happen to be the Scotland-wide one. We're hosted by the University of Edinburgh. So this is the first time that we have hosted this particular event. We have been working with British Council on professional learning and other things for a number of years. So our focus is on education for sustainable development. We're excited to be delivering this in Scotland. So we've engaged about 10 schools, 116 to 18-year-old students. It's going to be based at Murray House, which is the School of Education at the University of Edinburgh, very close to the Parliament, actually. So good location. And our facilitator isn't here today. Our facilitator is Professor Dave Ray, who heads up the Climate Change Institute at the University of Edinburgh, and has enormous experience, but not in UN negotiations in the way that you have, but he certainly has his thing is climate expertise. Also, our colleague Dr. Beth Christie, who is based at Murray House, and her thing is learning for sustainability, and also she's the academic lead for massive open online courses, MOOCs, that we've been running for British Council for a number of years, and in particular, Learning for a Sustainable Future live at the COP. And so we've been doing that since COP26, which of course was in Glasgow, and we are doing another one, COP28, this year. So our event actually links in with the MOOC, and we're going to be sharing the experience of connecting with others in the MOOC as well, which I think is really quite exciting.
Brilliant.
Kirsten, what have I forgotten?
I don't think I can really add to that. I'm Kirsten Leescombe, project manager with the centre, working alongside Betsy. So just that we're incredibly excited about this event. It's the first time it's been run in Scotland, to our knowledge, and we think it could be a template for additional events in the future, particularly with some of the other activities, as Betsy said, that we do with British Council, but possibly with other avenues as well. So yeah, very much looking forward to working with everybody on it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. So yeah, I think what I can add is that as Betsy and Kirsten have said, Peter, Professor Dave Ray, who will facilitate the event in Scotland, unfortunately can't join us today. And we have another facilitator who we have procured to run the Cardiff and Manchester events, who is called Dan Boyden. And I think you may have seen an email from him where he unfortunately can't make the call today. But I think it was sensible for us to carry on because Betsy and Kirsten, can brief Dave directly, and I can brief Dan directly because I work with him. And then I think what we will try and do, as we'd always planned, is to have a second call in a few weeks' time ahead of the events, where we will make sure that the actual facilitators are here in person. So I think today we can get all of the information, to hand that we can cascade onto them, and then in a couple of weeks they can come with some plans. I think is the idea you've set out, Peter, but you might want to clarify that on the call. But as I've understood it, they could come with their kind of basic plan for the day in the next session, and then we can have a Q&A and use the time in that way. So yeah, I hope that sounds good, Peter, and if it does, I think we're happy to sort of push on now.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, I'm delighted that the idea has really taken off after our very successful work in Belfast. And I really feel a great sense of solidarity with you, and feel free to call on me if you want any further advice as you prepare for these new sessions. It can feel quite daunting, I think, going into it for the first time, because in many ways we are trusting the young people's own curiosity and their own sense of being able to lead the process, and they do rise to the occasion. And it's very light touch in terms of our leadership of the event. It really does take off with and relies very heavily on their creativity, their sense of challenge, but their acute sense of the importance of the topic as well. I think, as I allude to in the presentation, there are very good reasons that young people are acutely engaged and are actually a key source of leadership around these themes, and we have to trust that, and that's where the spirit and the excitement comes from in these events. So we have to be careful not to get in their way, I think, as well. One thing that I want to say to you is that I'm sure you've looked at the Climate Interactive website.
Yeah.
You'll know that there are very good learning resources for the facilitators including some useful training videos around systems thinking, which is the underlying pedagogical focus for the World Climate Game. So I would encourage you to make good use of those resources. And at some point, you might even want to sign up to become an ambassador for the World Climate Simulation. Amanda Slevin and I are planning to do that, so we'll be officially registered as ambassadors for the process, and it'll just add to your credentials as you take this forward. So let's see if I can find my slide set. It's an adapted slide set from Climate Interactive. Do I have permission, Neil, to share content?
It's a good question.
All I have here are options around presenter mode, but it's not taking me to my desktop.
It's not offering you beneath the presenter mode. It's not offering you the screen option.
Just it's not. It's got an icon or the word window, but it's not actually giving me permission to access my desktop.
Does I set up the meeting? Abigail, would you know if there's a button I should hit to allow Peter to share his content?
I can share content, so I seem to have that permission. It's a little box on my screen at the top with an arrow, and it says share.
Yeah, no, I've pressed that.
Ah, right.
And then on mine, Peter, it then offers me beneath the presenter mode. There's a second, directly beneath. There's an option with screen, which would allow me to share my screen or my window. It's not giving you that.
It's not allowed me to do that. Let's see anything we can do with this.
Another option is to just send the PowerPoint to me, Peter, and I can share it.
My first thought, actually. Yeah, let me do that. Yeah.
Setting.
It's just loading on my email, Neil, so just give me a moment to see if this is...
No problem.
Maybe too big to say.
Yeah. Is it huge, Peter?
Right, that should up to your...
No.
It's got a lot of graphics. But I did take out quite a bit of stuff, but it still looks as if it's quite heavy. But Neil, that should be in your inbox by now.
My inbox, I think everything gets scanned or whatever, security. So give it 1 second. Hopefully it'll pop in. Yeah, I have it now.
Okay, so I'll speak to that and just give you a cue when we're ready to move across the slides, Neil.
It's just doing safety scans.
I'm
It always does this, but it will.
My first comments really are just to underline the the first theme is methodology, and I would probably describe it as a kind of improvisation. Um, it's great to be informed about the science and the politics and the various background briefings for the groups who take part. And also to have a very clear sense of the other roles, the diplomatic roles, but also the NGOs, the business lobby, um, both sides of the business lobby and the media. And there's I think what the young people respond to is the opportunity not only to brief themselves, but to go into the role and to rise to the challenge of performance. And one of the ways in which I think maybe the Belfast approach stands out is that we place a great emphasis on the real-time media presence, so that the media team have a fully equipped news room, if you like, or a desk where they're delivering news points and interviewing the delegates. And they can stop the process at any point, and their broadcasts go up on a big screen. They're introduced with the BBC World News signature tune. It's actually a remix, so it's a really so it dramatizes both the media presence and invites the young people to step into their role with a little bit of drama and extra excitement. It also makes the point that the negotiations in the conference room um, during the 2 weeks of the COP are simply the culmination of a year-round process that not only takes place in the subsidiary bodies, but in the media. The negotiators, the key regions, the key players are sending signals to one another through media output throughout the year. So there's that sense that this is it's a highly mediatized negotiation. It's not all about what happens in the conference room, but as I say, it really heightens their invitation to step into their roles, and some of them give star rated performances when they get the chance to stand in front of the camera and provide interviews and get up to all kinds of machinations in terms of signaling their position or challenging other regions to raise their game in the context of the negotiations. Are we ready to roll, Neil?
I'm afraid I'm having some problems. It won't recognize. So let me just share and show you, but it's not recognizing it for some reason.
It's a keynote. Are you using an Apple?
I'm just on a PC.
Ah, right.
Yeah, it won't. It's saying it doesn't recognize the file type.
Wonderful. Right.
Sorry about that.
Let me send that.
This is people in role, media role.
Yeah.
Who provides the
Yep.
So I think that's gone to you as a PPT now.
That should be perfect. It will. It will take the same minute or two to land through, Peter. So you might maybe if you want to just carry on filling for a minute, and then as soon as it's ready, I'll tell you.
So Peter, how different are your slides from the ones that are actually in the facilitators guide on the website?
I've just added some preliminary
Right.
slides about the actual preparation and the stages that we go through in terms of preparing the actual the steps before we would actually deliver.
Great, very handy.
And then
Great.
for the most part, the slides that actually set out the simulation, I'll use the originals, and
Right.
I've left those in other part of the presentation. So yeah, the 3 points are just around method, just some reflections on method. But normally, yeah, I think you'll have at least 2 people in the room to facilitate. Is that correct?
We're hoping to, yes.
Yes. Because normally, well, the facilitator, the one person will focus on really animation, animating the actual simulation, um, explaining and providing feedback to the student participants. And then it's good to have someone who is focused on the actual calculator,
Mhm.
who feed in the numbers and interpret the numbers. So those are 2 quite distinctive roles. You really need someone who's free to float about the room, and work across the groups, make sure all the groups are in role. And for the NGOs, for the first round of negotiations, you need really to provide a little bit of an explanation to the NGOs, to the media, to the lobbyists, drop some possibilities for them in terms of their interventions. So the other option that you might want to consider, the climate interactive people tend to suggest that the facilitator fulfills the role of the executive director, or the chair of the meeting. What I have done is normally invite 2 students, and we normally select these students with the help of the teachers. So 1 female and 1 male to actually chair the session as well, so that the facilitator role is working alongside, more like a senior staff member of the Secretariat, providing guidance to the student leads or chairs of the session. I call them the Secretaries General, so they're almost in the role of the UN Secretaries General or Secretary General, providing leadership on behalf of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that gives them a little bit of a leadership experience in convening, chairing, and providing feedback and guidance to the regional teams at the end of each round of the negotiations. So it's on, you can think about that yourselves. I've just noticed that in the formal advice, they suggest that the facilitator does that, but I think it's better if the young people themselves occupy all the roles and that the adults step back we should be almost invisible from the process. Yeah.
Peter, just to say, this isn't coming through. I haven't received a second email.
I don't.
I don't know if it's to do with file size but nothing's landed. I am on the Climate Interactive site. Would it be
No,
helpful?
it's not a
It's not the same, is it?
Okay, let me do that from scratch.
I wonder, because are you on a Mac, Peter?
I'm on an Apple.
Yeah. I think the issue might be to do with that, because this software, this video call we're on is a Microsoft video call. So I have checked the settings, and it is set that everybody can share their screen. So
Really?
yeah. So I think Beth and Kirsten, are you able to share your screens?
We are. I was going to suggest maybe trying to send it by WeTransfer. If it's a big file, it might come through sooner, and we can look at the formatting of it.
Or, Peter, if you just want to speak to it and share it with us after, we can figure out a way to get it after. I know it's not ideal, but whatever you think might be best. But I think it's to do with the different hardware we're using with
Have
your
another
lab.
look at that. And I've resent
See you later.
the slides, and I'm happy to proceed if this doesn't come through.
Okay, I'll keep looking. Yeah, I'll let you know if that lands. Okay, something has landed. Okay, here we go.
Sod's law, isn't it?
Okay. Okay, you should be able to see that now. Is that showing?
Yes, that's great. Yeah.
So just give me a nudge on what slide you would like, Peter.
Okay, so let's start there, Neil. So these are just the headings that we agreed for today's session. And I've said a few words about methodology, and that kind of merges into facilitation. I'll say a few words about preparing for the sessions before we actually before we actually deliver the simulation. There are some steps, and then some preparation for the briefings with the students. Okay, shall we move on? I think you've got that. Okay. So yeah, I was just going through this list. It is ideal if you have more than one person on hand. It's light touch, but it's good that there's somebody there constantly to answer queries from the students about their roles, and sometimes in the early part of the simulation, it does no harm to suggest interventions. It's particularly, the students coming out of the school system or for a day, they need a little bit or encouragement to step out of the typical disciplines of student life, and especially if they're being invited to become NGO activists. If that's to be authentic, they not only have to know their science and know a little bit about the politics of the multilateral negotiation system. They should also be encouraged to be as creative and, if necessary, as disruptive as possible, so that they understand that sometimes the role of NGOs is to force their visibility, if you like, and maybe to disrupt um, the proceedings or find creative ways to make their message heard. They can do this on, when they're invited to address conference, or they can do this by staging protests and demonstrations for the television news crew to make good use of the video team by doing some creative actions. I mentioned head, hand, and heart. Wonderful opportunity for the students to go beyond the conceptual and to link the climate learning to their felt sense of the importance and the formative, really the formative influence that the multiple ecological crises are having on their lives, their learning, and even their emotional lives. And that's, I'll mention that later when we talk about the debrief. We tend to want to be as led as much as possible by the participants, um, their own sense of curiosity, their preparedness to do the preparation before the simulation. So we allocate them into their roles and regional groups before the simulation to do some homework, but also begin to think about the roles and the characters they want to adopt when they go into the roles. The overall purpose is to offer an opportunity for participants to gain insights into the carbon and climate system. The key word is system, as well as the social and international geopolitical dynamics of the climate challenge. I have a 2-year-old crying in the background here. um, I think Mum's with her, so she's okay. The science and geopolitics is the crux here. I often say to the students, the first thing you learn is that the science, to some extent, gets left at the door whenever the diplomats cross that threshold into the conference room with their mandates from their capitals. So you'll know what I'm talking about, that the context of the negotiations, um, the students have to navigate their their ideals around the Paris Agreement, the science-led uh, aspirations of the world, if you like, in the context of the Paris goals to limit temperature changes to between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So you have that um, science-led vision, which also, of course, tends to match the aspirations and the expectations of young people, young leaders. But the learning here is the way in which there's a tension, a deep tension between those science-led targets and the positions that countries and regions occupy in relation to one another in the context of a climate negotiation. This is why questions of climate justice and equity and ethics are at the heart of the learning process. And these are at the heart of the reflection, ideally, that you'll do at the end of the process, examining that tension between the roles that countries are compelled to play because of the the world's inequitable distribution of access to the climate and access to resources, and the historical factors such as the colonial formation of countries' positions in relation to their own development. So the negotiation is a role-playing exercise exploring this interface, these tensions between the science and the geopolitics. And this, it's in each of the roles, the students are explore this tension for themselves and for the group. And at the heart of the I suppose the authentic learning is not only the way in which they enter into the roles, but the real-time feedback from the sophisticated calculator, the C-Roads calculator, that provides um, authentic feedback in terms of the likely responses of the climate system to the proposals that the regions are able to negotiate in the course of the simulation. Okay, Neil. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about this today, but the key pedagogical framework is systems thinking, and I've already touched on this. It's we think, uh, um, we learn through the simulation about the tension between individual country and actor positions, the ability of those actors to pursue their goals, and the way in which those goals can be frustrated because of the nature of the international system and the factors that come between those ideal science-led positions, um, factors like history, geopolitics, equity, ethical positions, and as I say, the formation of the regional differences, the distinctions in the regional positions uh, in relation to each other, where they come to in terms of their experience of climate justice fundamentally. Okay, Neil? There's a very good, I think I've mentioned this, short course of videos which serves as an introduction to systems thinking on the Climate Interactive website, and I'd strongly recommend that you take a look at that, because it's really the background thinking behind the design of the simulation from the perspective of those who've actually created the system and the calculator. Okay, Neil? So in terms of facilitation, a key moment after you've done your materials and the calculator is the briefing with your students. That entails allocating the roles. So there are two sets of roles. The roles of if you're doing this region simulation, which I recommend, you'll be allocating maybe 2/3 or more of the students to diplomatic roles, negotiator roles across the 6 regions. And then you will allocate roles for lobbyists, business lobbyists, fossil fuel interests, media. That's a key team, the media. The two session. And I think that's it. So there are roles beyond those of the diplomats, the negotiators, but they play an important role and underline the way in which civil society interacts with the negotiations. And in terms of the media, they give you a flavor, a really interesting flavor of how the entire exercise is mediatized. It's filtered through performative roles by civil society actors and negotiators in front of the TV cameras as well. Um, as part of your preparation, I'm sure I don't have to say this, but obviously some familiarity with the Paris Agreement, the background to the Paris Agreement, the progress towards the meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, and then some of the problems and controversies that have arisen in the context of those negotiations. All of that will be useful preparation for yourselves as facilitators. Just something on the negotiation dynamics and rules. Um, as I said, I tend to invite two of the young people to take on the roles of the Secretary General alongside the negotiators, and then there's the media and the lobbyists. I've already alluded to the importance. If you could get Neil, I don't know what you've lined up in terms of a resource, but in Belfast we have an outstanding video team who set up a news desk, provide a live video feed, and allow the students to present effectively a real-time news report up on a screen in the form of like a BBC news flash. Whenever they pick up on stories from the negotiators, or whenever the civil society actors or lobbyists want to intervene in the process. This is more than a component. I think it helps to really encourage the students to step up into a more dramatic engagement with the entire process. It really lifts the entire experience outside of the typical school learning environment, and creates more of a sense of theatre around the roles. Nevertheless, a well-informed role in each case if they've done their homework. The simulation, I'll tell you something about the simulation itself, running the simulation, but the debrief after the final round of negotiation is also very important. At the introduction, we, on the day of the actual simulation, at the introduction, that's, for the most part, you're trying to get the students to go into their roles quite rapidly. You don't want, we would sometimes have a guest speaker, and that can cause, that can disrupt actually the sense that you're inviting them to show up as negotiators, to step into the role. So I think at the start of the day, you want to step back from your the teachers are not involved. The adults in the room are trying to facilitate on demand, but not intervene and not be too visible. Be there to assist, support, and respond, but try not to disrupt this sense that they've stepped into a dramatic space to perform their roles and to get to grips with the negotiations. In contrast, the debriefing session can be a tremendous opportunity for the students to reflect on their learning, about this tension that they will experience between their ideal for the negotiations, their ideal aspirations for the Paris negotiations, and the tension that they experience when they step into the role of a region that is perhaps playing hardball and is, on the face of it, leaving the science at the door and putting their geopolitical equity or other interests ahead of the of what a science-led position might look like. I think that's a key learning. It gives them an appreciation of the role of just how geopolitics tends to frame the negotiations, and frustrates the science-led approach whenever power intervenes. Okay? So, as I say, my preference for the facilitators is to act really as a secretariat, serving the two young people who serve as the secretaries general. They will need a specific briefing on how the negotiations are to be conducted, and they need the reassurance that you're going to be there to give them a little bit of help with the script to respond to each round of negotiations. But you will, as the facilitators, enter the data into the calculator to provide the feedback. And you could give them a little bit of support in terms of interpreting that data as the secretariat. And then they can make a more general response, usually a bit of a pep talk at the end of each negotiating round to get the negotiators to resolve some of the differences that have emerged in the course of the simulation. Um, yes, I think so. I've covered that. You're giving some advice basically on the script for the Secretaries General and providing a bit of assistance with the simulator. The facilitators are, um, you have primary responsibility for understanding the way in which data is entered into the calculator, interpreting that, and also going through the scenarios. There are multiple scenarios in terms of showing the feedback, the result of each negotiation. We never burden the students with actually making a public presentation in terms of the scenarios, but you can invite the students to familiarize themselves with the calculator and to use it to run scenarios within their group in order to predict the likely impact of their proposals and their expectations of other regional groups. Your role during the simulation then is to provide kind of light touch feedback on demand to visit the negotiating groups, the diplomatic groups, and then to drop in some guidance or even proposals for interventions by the lobbyists, the NGOs, and the media. An important bit of coordination will be with the news team, because they will have to invite the conference to come to a halt whenever they want to do a broadcast and have completed their lined up some interviews to be broadcast during the proceedings. Timekeeping is your responsibility, obviously. Sensing the room, if some flexibility in terms of deadlines is required. There's a series of rounds of negotiations. You decide when the teams are ready to to table their proposals. Adaptability is probably I mentioned the word improvisation, and adaptability is part of this as well, in terms of knowing when to invite the teams to table their proposals, and not to do that prematurely. If they need a bit of time to do that, it's better that they complete the proposals rather than feel that they're rushing to do that, and maybe it becomes inauthentic or unrealistic. Okay, Neil. Some of these comments will make more sense when I go through the actual session. So some of the things that you could do to prepare is familiarize yourself, obviously, with the materials on Climate Interactive. Play around with the calculator, the 6-region calculator. I've called it a simulator here. You'll have to print out the documentation required by each of the teams who are tabling proposals. And there's background briefings for all of the roles, for the diplomatic teams as well as for the media, the lobbyists, and the NGOs. You have to print those out um, on the day, but also ask each team or individual to read those background briefings ahead of the simulation, well ahead of the simulation as well. Familiarize yourself with the regional background papers and data, and with the current state of the negotiations. You'll know that issues like loss and damage is a big issue, and an emerging issue, which actually makes the point of the simulation even more acutely, is the current crisis in the multilateral system, the tensions around the role of Russia in the multilateral system, the tensions between the US and China, um, the emergence of our multipolar world is deepening the complexity and the challenge of arriving at agreements across the multilateral system, not least in the context of climate, because of the development and financial commitments required of the actors at different points in their development. Okay, Neil. Or how are we for time?
Yeah, I think we penciled in till 4:30. Is that still good with you, Betsy?
It is.
Yeah.
Right, so I think we've got just over 30 minutes, Peter.
Okay, so I'll try to leave some time for questions at the end, but are there any questions at this stage before we go on to the actual uh, um shape of the session?
When you said the media TV real time, did you mean that you have a team within your university that provides something in particular, or were you talking about the people in those roles?
Okay, well, there's two. The students, there's a small group of students who play the role of journalists, TV journalists, and they interview uh, participants in the simulation. And then I referred to the video team. We have a dedicated team of technical uh, people. They're a private company, um, and they provide the, the 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 video, the interviews, and help the students project those interviews onto a large screen and provide the signature tune to alert the participants to the fact that a news flash is about to appear on the large screen in the hall.
And
Right.
on that, Peter, I'm sort of familiar with this, having discussed it, with Elaine and yourself last year, and having heard about the events in Belfast previously, but we didn't do it quite that way in London. But I do, through recent discussions with Elaine and what you've said today, I do think it adds a lot of value, and the drama and everything you've said. So just to be completely clear on how that's worked in Belfast, would those students acting as the press or the news readers, would they be situated outside of the room and it's filmed outside of the room but beamed projected into the room, or are they in a corner of the room but still it's filmed and beamed onto the screen?
Yeah, if the room is big enough, they can be simply in a corner of the room, but have a desk where they would have a base, and they can record a kind of as if they were sitting in a studio, a little studio space, delivering pieces to camera or interviewing participants. They bring them down to the corner and uh, bring in a piece of an interview alongside some of the news points that they're reporting. It can work if the room is big enough. They don't have to be outside the room. Um, Although we've done that on occasion, but it can, as long as the room's big enough and they have their own sense of a discrete studio space to do their own thing, and work with the technicians to set that up. That can work, yeah.
I think I understand. So thank you, Peter. That's clear. I think, Betsy, what, a consideration for us is whether we have the AV
Capacity.
capability to do that in all of our locations. I'm thinking about Cardiff and Manchester. You'll, of course, be thinking about Edinburgh, Betsy. I suppose maybe an alternative to that. It's not quite as dramatic, and it doesn't give that sense of sitting in the BBC newsroom or the CNN newsroom or whatever. But possibly one other alternative would be to just set up a separate kind of lectern for the press, and if they had a microphone that went out to the room, they could just do a live broadcast from the lectern, which would remove the need for the video camera. It's not quite the same, but I think you could still potentially play the music, and that would alert the room to look at the press lectern, and then there's a live news type bulletin from the lectern, and still potentially you could bring a guest speaker onto the lectern and do a short interview section. So that might be one option for us if we don't have that AV capacity to actually set up a separate sort of newsroom, as it were, and video it in. Does that sound, sort of as a compromise, Peter, does that sound like it might sort of do a job for us?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I can imagine that it's there. You could, I mean, the technology. I mean, all you need really these days is an iPhone and a large screen in the corner of the room. You don't have to have a fully kitted out team of external experts now to facilitate this notion that you're projecting something onto a screen and doing something in real time in terms of news. But yes, someone at a lectern would fulfill the role in a slightly reduced, or it just takes a little bit of the drama out of it.
Yeah.
But that's, it all depends on what facilities or resources are available to.
Good. So something for us to think about, Betsy, for the other events. We can look into what might be possible, but there's a couple of options there to achieve that. That news, the role of the press and the news in the way Peter's described, which I do think is a powerful part of the day. But we'll have to think about how we can realize it, because we won't have the same AV team as they have in Belfast at the other events. Good. Sorry, I was just getting involved to make sure I understood in my role supporting the events, in in Cardiff and Manchester. Was there anything else on your question list at this point, Betsy?
There are a few questions, but I think you may cover the answers in what you're going to say next. So, yeah, please continue. It's really helpful.
Great.
Shall I switch back to the slides?
Yeah, slides. We'll go through the shape of the actual exercise now. So it's important to make a decision quite early in the process between the two versions of the calculator. One is a 3-region calculator, and one is a 6-region calculator. By the calculator, we'll have a look at it at the moment in the graphic, but it's. Have you looked at it, Betsy? Have you looked at the?
I have tried to look at it, and have some questions about it.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to explaining how you use it.
Right, okay. So the it's a simplified negotiation in some ways, but the 6-region negotiation is it's not a million miles away from what happens in the actual climate negotiations. As you know, the positions, the dominant negotiating positions are filtered through a series of important groups, both regional groups and interest groups that form across countries who have a shared interest at the negotiation. Some of these are ad hoc groups, and some of them are standing groups, like the Alliance of Small Island States, for example, would be a key role within the G77. So if you go for the six uh, group version, you'll have the US, the European Union, other developed nations. That's usually, I suppose, the groups who form um, the OECD. Usually OECD standard groups. China is a distinctive actor in its own right. India, and then the other developing nations. And that's most of the other G77 countries who also work as a distinctive group. And that incorporates, of course, the small island states, and they would operate. It could be actually identified or given roles within the G77 or the group number 6. Okay, so that's ahead of the actual simulation day when they come together. What we tend to do is allocate the students to their groups as part of the preparation, and we meet them online, talk about the likely positions, the geopolitics that might inform their positions within those groups, and get them to read their briefing papers. There are briefing notes available on the Climate Interactive site. They're updated and give them a real sense of the positions, their political interests, and their positions on climate change, to give them a head start in terms of the positions that they're going to table at the conference in the context of this imaginary Paris negotiation, or Paris-like negotiation. Okay. One of the things that apart from the mediatized emphasis, we use flags. So each of the when you arrange the room for the simulation, you have a top table for the Secretaries General. That should be draped in a UN flag. And then you have separate tables for the 6 regions, and they will have some flags as well for each of those countries represented by the regions. An interesting thing that we do, I've forgotten now if it's our own idea or whether it's yeah, I think it's actually part of the Climate Interactive proposal. When you're distributing the tables for the different groups to sit apart, they should be separated out so that they can have their own conversation without overhearing each other. Um, and the other thing we do is that we reflect the power imbalance in the room. Can you guess how we do that? How would you reflect the power imbalance if you were setting out the room for the 6 regions? Can you guess?
Yeah, we've had a chat about this in with colleagues at British Council in terms of what's what's available to the delegates in terms of for example, the developed nations would be given glasses of water and chocolates and all this kind of thing, and proper tables. Whereas the developing nations, perhaps the lobbyists might might have slightly less, might not even have a proper table on which to write. So just that sort of physical representation of inequality. So straight away you've got that tangible representation, and I believe it provokes quite a strong response from the young people if I've picked that up correctly.
Absolutely. No, it provides a real visceral introduction to the question of power, and you know, I mean some there have been occasions when I've had to draw attention to it, but if you do that dramatically enough, especially when you provide chocolates and juice at and also the proximity of the US table, the EU table to the Secretaries General at the top of the room, you know, so they're able to intervene and they're much more visible, you know, evidently visible as part of the negotiation. And you have the other developing countries down at the back of the room, maybe with insufficient numbers of chairs, very limited table space, and barely a glass of water between them. So you're dramatizing and really creating that response as they go into the room, that the rules are fixed before they even enter into the space, you know. So that's, yeah, there's a lot of choreography involved, and try to do that before they enter the room, obviously. So they go in and find the room, and that's the way they find it, when they go in and find their places, and their print out, obviously, the table places for each country and each region, so they know where to go and sit. And ideally, the two young people acting as the Secretaries General sit at the top table and have uh, a couple of seats to each side, with the facilitators there to provide ongoing advice throughout the session. Okay, so that's your. It's almost a, you know, think of it in terms of, almost in terms of theatre. It's a learning experience. It's a workshop, but it's there's a theatrical component to this, to give them a sense that there's an expectation that they are arriving into a space where they're leaving their persona as students behind. The other thing that you can do is invite them to come in formal dress. Get them to think about, how would you be dressed at a UN negotiation, you know, as a diplomat, when you're meeting and representing your country. The NGOs are different, the media might be different, but the diplomats come in their Sunday best. They're always projecting themselves in very formal and very sharply dressed, you know. Yeah. Okay, so apart from the diplomats, who are the students who are allocated to the 6 regions, you will then have the climate activists, the United States Climate Alliance, which is a dedicated group working to influence domestic policy in the US. So they're working at the multilateral level, but also working to the US agenda. And then the fossil fuel lobbyists, who are practicing the dark arts, making good use of the media to embarrass and cajole those who are wanting to be too ambitious or too idealistic. And then the important team, the journalists, who are floating around the room, picking up on stories, um, and they try to drive home the notion that they are part of the negotiating process, in the sense that they are floating possible positions and trying to glean responses from other regions in advance of the formal negotiation. So you know, and of course it could be rumor. It doesn't. They don't. They're not necessarily reporting fact. It could be a spun story from one of the regions about what their expectations are in the context of the negotiation. Okay. So let me just, are we ready to go to that? That's the, I think let's move on there. The context of the negotiation, obviously, is uh, the Paris, ideally 1.5, which is, I think we that was always a political target rather than a science-led target, to be honest. Um, but the temperature goal would be certainly to remain within the 2 degrees temperature rise by the end of the century. The calculator will give you immediate feedback on whether or not you're likely to succeed in meeting that temperature goal at each stage in the negotiating round. You can have 3 or 4 negotiating rounds where each region tables proposals. There's 2 dimensions to the proposals. This is what I wanted to mention before we go on to the actual calculator. There's the proposals around um, basically the offer, basically the offer from the region in terms of the carbon reductions and mitigation, both in terms of carbon and also offsetting in terms of uh, forestation and deforestation, limiting deforestation. So all of that will be each in each negotiating round, each region will have a bit of paper which is available for you to print off with their offer. So that's the climate offer in terms of the carbon mitigation and emissions reduction, and there are dates at which these offers kick in as well. The other important feature of the negotiation, the second component, is a kind of a proxy for the decisions that each team must make or each region must make in terms of the relationship between their commitment to following the science and their commitment in terms of the the resourcing of their commitments or the resourcing of the commitments of others. By that, I mean that the second component of each negotiating round is the $100 billion a year climate fund that each region must either contribute to, and they make an offer to contribute to that fund in each round of the negotiation, or if they're developing countries, other developing countries, or small island states, they are linking their demands on those funds, their demands on drawing down from those funds, or asking others to increase their contributions to those funds. They're linking those demands to their preparedness to increase their ambition in terms of climate mitigation. So the financial component of the negotiation acts as a proxy, as a stir for each region to think about their financial power, their economic power, um, and the linkage that is often made implicitly between the levels of development, their sense of climate justice, and their sense of expectation, legitimate expectation from developing countries in terms of the resourcing of commitments and the level of ambition of commitments, early commitments from the developed world, possibly later commitments from the developing countries. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's important that when you're introducing the nature of the proposals, that they see the importance of that and give them a little bit of context to introduce the notion that this introduces a little bit of a poker game element to the whole thing, you know. And certainly at the first round of the negotiations, do you give away your hand? Do you, do you put everything on the table? Maybe not. Maybe you're not only keeping your own hand to yourself, but you need a round or two of the negotiations to tease out where the others stand as well, and you don't give away your leverage in the first or second round. You're waiting to see how much leverage you can exercise, and you don't know that until the other positions are tabled. So there's a bit of a poker game feel to it, and you could do that quite explicitly by making that kind of comparison, where the teachers are not looking, talk about how the poker the game works, Okay, Neil.
And can I just ask a question? So, when do you introduce the to the students how they reach decisions on their proposals, or are they just basing it on information that they've been given in advance of the meeting?
The briefing ahead of the simulation
Mm-hmm.
should cover the what I'm about to go through now, which is the components of the offer based on their reading of the background notes and
Right.
their sense of their understanding that this is a negotiation, that the science isn't the only factor that is driving their decision. So you've got to convey a lot of that in the briefing ahead of the day of the simulation. On the day of the simulation, you could rehearse some of those points, but you'd really, it can be a bit artificial, and you can end
Mm-hmm.
up leading the process too much,
Yeah, yeah.
rehearse too much of that on the morning of the actual negotiation. So you've got to convey a lot of that information. That it's okay. The science is one factor, the finance is another, and the mandates that the regions bring to the negotiations. Um, they're negotiations because there are complicating factors that come into tension with the science and what it might take to reach the temperature goal. So you're trying to convey that in your briefing well before they come into the negotiating room. Is that, can you imagine how you would do that?
In our situation, we're planning to brief the teachers who will then brief the students. So it sounds to me as if you directly have spoken to the students, but I don't think we're going to be in a position to do that. But it's very helpful that you've outlined, the key things to stress in that briefing.
Yes.
That we must then get the teachers to stress.
Yeah. Well, get the teachers to look at some of the little video snippets of negotiations involving students. There's a few videos on the Climate Interactive website.
Mm-hmm.
I think uh, what is useful to remember and what will be useful to convey to the students or to the teachers is that this is not about success is not reaching the 2 degrees temperature limit. Success is an authentic experience of understanding and experiencing the factors that actually come between the science and the realization of the goals. In other words, you have to, um, by briefing well, briefing around questions of justice, inequity. By briefing well, you're inviting them to enter into a realistic appreciation that the science is not the only factor, that the response to the science is highly mediated by the respective region's experience of exclusion from opportunities for development, and also their opportunities to fund in a just way their responses to the targets in terms of being able to fund technology for adaptation and mitigation. So it's the teachers need to understand that they're not measuring the success is not about emerging with a uh, achievement of getting within the 2 degrees. They might do that by the end of the day, but success is actually ending the day with a more realistic sense of incompleteness and even frustration that the system, the world system as it stands, because of power differentials, because of the experience of the developed world having monopolized access to the climate and resources and everything else. That's the kind of experience you want them to come away with, really, if it's to be realistic.
Yeah, the right deck.
Do you ever do that without leading the thing, without imposing? So it's a delicate pedagogical exercise as well.
I just wanted to come at this point because we are 4:25 now, and we had said we would finish at past. So I just wanted to provide that time check.
Great.
Yeah, I'm going to proceed.
We're quite keen to see the calculator.
Yeah. I was going to share my screen and go through the calculator, but I'm not sure I'll be able to do that. Have you played around with the calculator at all? Can you give me a sense of what you know about it, or what you've done with the calculator up to now, and then I can take it from there?
No, I think you should start from baseline, nothing.
Right. Okay, well,
I certainly have looked.
I attended one of the online trainings, but obviously that was the calculator being used by the trainer rather than an opportunity to play with it ourselves. So it'd be great, as Betsy says, to assume we know nothing.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, if you're doing the six region simulation, you will open up the calculator and you'll see this. This is the main interface. And I mentioned a sheet where each region records its proposal in each negotiating round, and that sheet corresponds to the 5 elements region. So you have the emissions peak year, the year at which you're going to allow your emissions to peak. Then the year when your reductions will start, the rate at which reductions will reduce, the percentage rate. You should know that no economy could survive if you were to promise anything more than 3 or 4, 5%. It's just that's realistically the kind of ballpark you're talking about. So even 1 or 2% a year, is ambitious. And then I mentioned to you that the other 2 elements, in terms of the carbon content of the proposal, are offers for the prevention of deforestation. This obviously corresponds to the nature of the territory that the country occupies, and then the promotion of afforestation. And that's from 1 to 100 in both cases. And finally, the final number they will put on their sheet is the offer to contribute to the $100 billion a year climate fund, or if they're a small, least developed country or group of countries, they will be asking for a drawdown, some benefit from that fund, and they'll put a number on that. And each region will be, as I say, the trick here is to get them to think in terms of the relationship between those two sets of numbers. The ambition, the level of ambition, will be linked to, in the case of developing countries, the least developed, their ambition will be linked to the prospect of transferring funds from that $100 billion climate fund. Therefore, they will be expecting the US, the European Union, other developed countries to make generous contributions in each round of the negotiation, to up their contributions, possibly before they make any substantive offer on reducing their carbon emissions, or they may put a rather late year on reducing their emissions or peaking emissions before they see the color of the eyes, or the colors of the eyes of the developed world, to see what's on the table, you know. So around this can look like a technical exercise, but it's actually it's the construction of each round's position is a negotiation, and it should be driven by negotiating logic. That notion that it's a bit of a poker game. You're trying to tease out what the others will potentially offer, and you're trying to tease out one's own leverage. Each team is looking at its own leverage in each round to see how they can increase the ambition of the others and the levels of cooperation from the others. The fundamental observation in the context of climate change is that, unlike trade negotiations, the 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 developed world cannot meet its own ultimate ambitions without the cooperation of the developing world. So in many ways, the negotiating logic is turned on its head. You know, the Paris goals cannot be met without the deep collaboration and cooperation of the emerging developing world in particular, which is why countries like China are very important. So that's they're constructing their offer. Those numbers at the end of the negotiating round are presented to the Secretariat and the Secretaries General at the top of the table. And each region will nominate one person to give a 2-minute speech. The speech explains their position, but also assesses the positions of the other regions or their expectations of other regions. The speech will make demands of other regions and will explain the extent to which they will make a more generous offer, perhaps, on the basis of movement from other parts of the room. So the speech is quite a dramatic and cathartic moment. I should have said that while there are internal talks within each region, you also encourage them to do bilateral talks as well. So they'll have some information about what's happening in other parts of the room. But the speech is the moment when they put their cards on the table in a limited way and make demands on others as well. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
And then all the numbers from the 6 regions are entered. You can see the white numbers, the years, and the 0%, all of those can be populated by the numbers from each region. And the facilitator will, and you'll see right away, based on those numbers, the temperature, the projected temperature increase on the top right-hand side. And that, of course, is the critical headline, which will tell them to what extent they're approaching the headline target of the Paris Agreement. In when the simulation is working well, you will not move very far from the current baseline. We're projected to go well beyond 2 degrees at the moment. And for the first couple of rounds, if the simulation is working well, there will be quite limited offers, and the temperature by the end of the century will still be well in excess of 2 degrees Celsius. So that's the headline feedback to the negotiators at the end of each round. But the genius of the calculator is that you can go a series of graphs and show likely sea level rise. You can show the data from the countries in a number of formats, and you can usually save each scenario, so you can revisit the results. So by the end of the day, for example, if you've had 4 or 5 negotiating rounds, you're able to revisit the data, the outcomes for each negotiating round, and give them a sense of any progress they've made across the day. Maybe at our next session, we'll have learned how to actually project this, and I'll go through. I'll work a number of scenarios for you, and we'll actually practice using the calculator, and you'll see some of the feedback. But you can do that yourselves if you look at the simulation or the graphs and the way in which to save each scenario. You can do that yourselves in your own time. But I'm happy to take questions now if there are any other questions about the calculator. You can see the headline is the important one, but there's lots of issues, lots of standoffs, lots of politics emerging in the course of constructing these offers at each round of negotiation, ideally.
And so you said there could be 3 or 4 rounds. How long does each round take, and what kind of timetable do you normally work with for the whole process?
So we would normally start at around 10 o'clock in the morning. We would plan for at least 3 or 4 rounds of negotiation. Those rounds could take, I suppose, 25, 30, 40 minutes. You need to sense the room and give the students time. So you give them an outline time to achieve their to record their offer for the negotiating round. But the important thing here is the process. Rather than rush them to put numbers on the paper, the important point is for them to understand that they're in a negotiation. They need to clarify their position within each regional group, and then decide what they need to learn about other, what the US needs to learn about China's position. Nominate 1 or 2 people to go and talk to the China table to see what China on offer in terms of its its own climate goals, but also in terms of contribution to the fund. And then it gets even more complicated than that, because China might be in a position to influence the G77. They might get a better response if the US works in harness with China and they make demands of the developing countries as a group, which is, that's realistic. The breakthrough running up to Paris really was the bilateral alignment or convergence of positions between the US and China that led to a breakthrough in the negotiations. China is a bit of a swing actor and is an important player in the G77. And they will often use their power in the negotiations to mediate and leverage more generous contributions to the fund, for example, by the G7 or G8. So yeah, it's all in the process. It's in the communications, in the leveraging of ambition, and the leveraging of financial resources that are required, especially by the least developed, to meet the expectations placed on them by the developed world. The questions of justice, or it's all about the sense of justice, as opposed to simply sitting down like with an IPCC report and imagining that we're simply going to deliver the transformations in our economies or in our strategies for the alleviation of poverty. These are still foremost in the minds of the developing negotiators, developing in the minds of the diplomats representing these countries. It's the science of climate change. It's one factor, but their response is mediated by all of these complex factors that are set out in the briefing papers that you will introduce to them when you're briefing the teachers, but also providing them on the day of the simulation. The teachers should really distribute the briefing papers for each of the regions as soon as the students are allocated their positions, and the teachers should be giving maybe a briefing to the students about those positions and understanding or projecting the idea that this is about questions of climate justice and a sense of injustice, rather than simply a scientific or technical presentation of the science.
And are they
Peter,
given, sorry, are they given any additional information on the day? Or are they just sitting in their roles and they have that briefing paper?
There's a very good, I'm using in part a PowerPoint presentation which gives lots of good background to the science of climate change and the background to how the negotiations are conducted. So the teachers should familiarize themselves with that presentation, because normally I would do that as part of the presentation online to the students, a week or two before the actual simulation. They should have sight of that presentation and be doing a bit of homework based on the brief.
Is that on the website, the NO's website?
On the
Okay,
website.
great.
That's available on the website as part of the training resources for the facilitators. Yeah.
And just to clarify, Peter, in terms of we have done this event in Belfast the last 2 years and you have led it. Just to be clear on the process, how it's worked, you have briefed the students directly, and could you just tell us how that worked exactly? Did you do it in one go? Did you have all the students in the same room or on the same call, or did they, did groups of students in their particular geographies or whichever group they've been allocated, did they come in group by group and you briefed each group separately, or were they briefed together? And how long overall did it take for you to brief all of the students? You know, just thought that detail.
Yeah, they're briefed as a group, and we normally do one briefing for all of students. And I think Elaine would have allocated the roles by then, so they're receiving the information from within a particular role in the negotiation. So when I talk about leverage and I talk about the specific, the characteristics of the position that each of the regions occupies, they understand. Yeah, that's the position I'll be taking. This is the kind of logic that I will be bringing to the exercise. So they're the thing is stood up well in advance of arriving on the day. The students have a direct knowledge that they're going to occupy distinctive positions when they turn up for the negotiation.
Yeah.
And do you have a set of slides that you used for that, Peter?
The slides are, yeah, there's a very good slide pack on the Climate Interactive website. Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't adapt that in any way. You didn't change it.
We would adapt that. Yeah, we would take out. We do the. I think we've done the 3 region and 6 region. So we would take out whichever. We would only use the slides that apply to the 6 region simulation, if that's the one we're going to do. You know. Yeah.
Grand. Can I just ask a logistical question, which was around the allocation of roles to students? Did you do that, say, for example, School A takes on the role of climate lobbyist, School B is the Chinese delegation, or did you mix it up so you had, for example, 2 students from School A as part of the US lobby, another 2 students from School A were part of the Chinese lobby? How did you mix them up?
Yeah, I know from memory, and I think Elaine tends to lead on this, but I think we tend to ask specific schools to focus on certain regions, so that it enables those teams to begin to internalize the briefing and to work together a little bit on their specific briefing. So as much as possible, the teams should be able to form and communicate and internalize their briefing together before they arrive on the day of the simulation.
Grand. That makes
Sorry,
sense.
Peter, can I come there? Sorry, I've been quiet because I've been doing outside. For Belfast, each school only gave 2 students, so it was easy for them to do like that. But whereas for all our events, each school are going to give us 8 to 10 students, and if we put all of them into one team, we're just a bit skeptical about whether they'll be just talking because they already know each other, not necessarily about the work on that day, but other things.
Yes.
So we were thinking whether we could actually split the school into 3 groups. So 3 of them can represent US, 3 of them can represent a lobbyist, and then they can mix up with other schools.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, actually, that, you know, if you have the numbers, there's some advantage in terms of the experience of the event of the students mixing across the school. So if you can at least have 2 or 3 within one region, and then another 3 in another region, then at least they're able to do some preparation, but then they will join a larger team when they actually turn up for the simulation. But yeah, I think you're right, actually, that you'd want to do that rather than have them doing most of the conversation within one team and within one school when they turn up for the simulation. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
And
Peter.
just another question in terms of how did you choose the secretariat students? Because obviously, if we've got a pool of between 80 and 100 young people,
I think,
how is that decision made?
The decision about the 2 who will act as the Secretary General It's the one um, it's the one decision where we do tend to give some thought to the capacity, obviously a little bit of experience of public speaking. I mean, I think I would normally say to Elaine, go for a couple of students who have some experience at debating, public debating, and who can think on their feet a little bit. We don't always succeed, but yes, I think you do have to be careful. I mean, obviously, um, it's a more public-facing role in the context of the simulation, and you want them to maybe even they've experienced a bit of leadership at school, this kind of thing. You want them to be able to come up with a bit of a script for themselves rather than be fed a script entirely by the facilitators.
Okay. So I'm just thinking, we may have more applicants than places if we go put the call out to teachers. We've got 10 schools lined up, and if each school comes back with a nominated pupil, then what was your experience of making that judgment call the last time? Was there a sort of interview process, or was it just a case of names in a hat? Or
Yes, I thankfully Elaine does that rather. I think she does that rather discreetly with maybe the teachers that she knows well. Um, so I'm not privy to her own diplomacy, but it's not a general call.
okay,
I think it's a more discreet exercise. I mean, one way to do this, I guess, in a way that's fair, might be to say to the teachers, if you're meeting them collectively, that you have a number of special roles like the media, the NGOs, the business lobby, um, and attach some descriptions to those roles, and then ask for nominations for a series of those roles, special roles, rather than and then include the particular um, role of the Secretaries General in terms of leadership, public speaking. Um, that might be a more discreet way to identify the students who have some capacity to fill those roles.
grand.
In case you
Thank
get
you.
more
That's very
more
helpful.
than
I think once again for Belfast, because each school only gives two people, I think she picks a school and those two students are secretariat general. So it's a bit more slightly more easier than for us. If
yes.
you know any school or any teachers that you have worked with, I'm assuming that we can probably, because all the other roles we have to do sort of put them into a box, just like there's no sort of science behind grouping them and giving them a briefing. Only one question I had, Peter, is regarding the EU, other developed nations and developed nations. Do you actually give me some countries to group them into, or like do they just come as one group? Because on one of the videos last time, I did see like flags of UK, flags of France. So do you have like countries? How many countries are represented in those bigger
Yes.
groups?
Yes. Within the regional groups, it is it's a good exercise to allocate some particular countries, influential countries within the group. And then I think within the other developing countries, it's always useful to have a couple of people representing the Alliance of Small Island States, for example, because they're a very, very powerful kind of normative or ethical voice within the negotiations. So you wouldn't want to completely subsume them into the other development countries. You'd want them to have a very distinctive presence and visibility in the negotiations.
And do you have like sort of like, is Japan one of them, like another country within that, within like
They
not
would
not on
be,
that our developing, but the developed nations, or like
yeah,
I did
well,
see those.
you can pick whatever countries you like, really, from the G7. you know, in terms of, or the OECD really, it's OECD countries, isn't it? The other developed countries, yeah.
So if you have like 8 people representing other developed countries, are they actually 2 from UK, 2 from Japan? All of them are given a country to represent?
Let me see, how do we do that? I don't think we've allocated all of the countries, but we have had individuals represent particular countries. I mean, obviously, you know, the other developed could include the UK, Scotland, um, you know so because we now have to obviously have the UK represented outside of the EU group, whereas distinct from the EU group, you know. I think Elaine has actually been in touch with Climate Interactive, and I think they've begun to amend their materials to reflect that.
They did that. Yeah, UK is now other developed nations rather than EU.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
I think we did have a group representing the UK at the London event last year, and I think that was valuable because it you know, it encouraged those students to look at domestic policy in the UK and to understand it and to, you know, represent the UK in that way. And I think on the video we have from the day, our independent video, you hear the young person who represented the UK speak, and he's, you know, from London, and he speaks to how he found it very valuable to represent the UK and to understand better what, you know, what the UK's position was in these things. So, you know, you could do that as the UK, you could do that as Scotland, perhaps, Betsy and Kirsten, but I think there was a value in that, drawing that, you know, that specific UK voice out. But perhaps, like Peter says, perhaps less important to do that for, you know, I think it doesn't matter so much then which other countries you pick, whether it's Japan or whoever, you know. I think that can be more of a group, but I think the UK or Scottish or, you know, whatever voice is valuable.
Yes. The other point there, I mean, I can see the advantages of having someone from the UK represent the UK, but in the context of the simulation and the learning, it can also be useful for people uh, who might volunteer to be the US or the EU, but actually put them in the less developing or the least developed, to give them a different experience of the power dynamic and the negotiations. So it's just another thought. The teachers, um, you know, the teachers will find ways to do this, but not everybody should be allocated on the basis of their sympathy. But maybe a bit more random than that, and maybe even, you know, it can be useful for those who have a natural sympathy for the developed positions to experience these negotiations from a very different perspective, you know.
I just wanted to come in again. We're just gone 5 to 5, and I will have to leave at 5 as the host. So I think that means you will too. So I think I could. There's a few more things on my list. I could definitely go on for another 30 minutes, but I'm sure we've all got other commitments too. So just a few minutes now, possibly to wrap up. Was that Betsy and Kirsten? I'll give you, you know, was there anything else you wanted to ask before we finish today?
There was a couple of logistical things from my end, but Abigail, I think we could maybe pick up together on that. Obviously, we have a deadline of Friday this week for registrations from pupils and teachers. So remind me, do we have a date in the diary for our next catch up?
So we are
for us. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, go on, Abigail. I think it's the date you were going to mention, the 2nd of November, isn't it?
That's with Peter Doran. That's with Peter. But
Yeah.
did you mean with Peter, or did you mean with internally?
No, I meant internally in terms of a side discussion around logistics. Because there's there's quite a few steps here in terms of pupil briefings, teacher briefings, etc., etc. So I'm wondering if we can get a meeting in the diary, perhaps early next week, by midweek at latest, to discuss that. Abigail, perhaps you and I could have a separate discussion and just look at the sort of logistics side of things, if that suits.
Sure.
I think that sounds really sensible. I think to add in, I think, you know, it would be really sensible to have Elaine at that meeting too.
Yeah.
As Peter's alluded to, you know, they've had a nice division of responsibilities in Belfast, where obviously Peter's led the facilitation, led the day, but Elaine has managed a lot of the logistics. So I think we need to squeeze as much information out of Elaine as possible as well. And I was certainly keen to think of, you know, many of the same things for Cardiff and Manchester. I was just going to add one point to that. That logistics meeting with Elaine, sort of, you know, early next week, I think would be great if you could possibly help set that up, Abigail.
Yeah, sure.
And then Peter, for your part, I think our thought is to go ahead with the meeting on the 2nd of November as a second meeting. And we'll try and make sure that the two actual facilitators, Dave Ray and Dan Boyden, attend that meeting.
Yeah.
And maybe what I'll do, Abigail and I will do behind the scenes, Peter, is just speak with Betsy and Kirsten. And once Dan has watched the recording of this, I will speak with Dan, and we'll just try and pull together a kind of set of ideas for what we think that second session could best focus on, and then maybe share them with you, and you know, you will then have some of your own ideas too, and we can maybe pull that session plan together in that way, if that sounds helpful, just to make sure we get the most out of that second session.
Sure. Yeah, I think we could focus more on the use of the calculator. The one other thing I would say today, and it's something, it's learning really from something that we haven't always succeeded in Belfast, but protect. You know, I've talked about being adaptable and flexible in terms of the negotiating rounds, but I would protect the time at the end of the day for the debrief. I think that's a really, that's really when you're going to reinforce the learning, and also hear for yourselves about the learning from the exercise. And of course, I mean, hopefully the objective is to take the learning away from the simulation. Think about, you know, for the young people to think about their own leadership roles, to think in more complex ways about the influence they have on the life of their school, their community, and the multilateral system through their connections with civil society organizations. So protect time at the end of the day to really invite the students to maybe stay in their groups initially and do some reflection, and then open out into a conversation about translating some of the learning into their commitments as young leaders around climate change.
Yeah,
I'd certainly echo that from London last year. There was more with a young, or I think the key thing was a less experienced facilitator. There was more emphasis on getting through the program, you know, getting through each bit and getting to the end almost from the facilitation perspective. And I think, you know, as you've emphasized at several points today, Peter, that's not the point. This is not a tick box exercise. This is about the rich experience of understanding those dynamics that are at play in the geopolitical, you know, systems. And, you know, it's much more about that. And in a way, I think my experience from London, you know, obviously we wouldn't set out with this in mind, but my experience from London would be almost, actually, I would, with hindsight, I would rather have not got to the end of the process, but had that rich debate, negotiation, you know, and really done it in the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, you know, rather than, you know, rushing to get to the end and missing out on that. So I really really echo that. I think that's so important. We didn't get that quite right in London last year, and I'd really love us to get that right this year in the different events. You know.
Yeah, it's a night out at the jazz club for some riffing and improvisation rather than the night at the proms.
Yeah, it's a nice
I
analogy.
like that. Between that and the rigged deck and the poker, I think we're in for a fun time. So no, that sounds ideal, and I love the way you opened, Peter, with an allusion to head, heart, and hands, because that's very much how we frame our activity across the board anyway. So that resonated very strongly with us in terms of where we can go with this. No, I think it'll be great. It'll be all right on the night.
It will. We're looking forward to it.
Definitely.
Very good. Okay,
Well,
forward to seeing you again at the next session. But feel free in the meantime. Crops up and you need clarification a bit earlier, I'm more than happy to respond.
That's extremely kind,
very,
and
very generous.
we will definitely be taking you up on that. So
we will try to collate. We'll try and collate our questions so you're not bombarded with random emails. But no, that's a very generous offer. Thank you. And
I'm sure that from each other, it'll be fascinating to see the different experiences emerge.
Great. And will you make it across for the Edinburgh event, Peter? We'd love to see you in person.
Not
if you're
going
able
to. No, I think Neil, I think the most that I'll be able to do is the London event. I had hoped at one point that we, a couple of us, would do the grand tour, but for all kinds of reasons, not least my partner Amanda has long COVID, and she just doesn't have the stamina really to do more than the Belfast session, actually. So.
Please tell her we're asking for her.
Yeah, no, thanks, Peter. We do appreciate this support, and I understand you were in Dublin yesterday and very busy. So we really welcome how this session. You've been very generous with your time today, and we look forward to the next session. But I understand the limitations to you getting to the different events, but we're excited by the prospect of potentially having your experience and expertise in London, which I think will be really valuable. And we'll do our best to support, to use the learning you've shared today to make sure that Edinburgh and Cardiff and Manchester are also equally brilliant events. Brilliant. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you all for your time. I've got the recording here, so it's going to be a good 2 hours for Dan to look at. So I'll make sure he engages with that. But we'll be in touch on the next session, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah,
okay.
If you stop the recording, Neil, and send it to us as well, we'll make sure that we share it with Dave and Beth at our end. If you send over the file, that would be lovely.
Yeah, perfect.